Aloha again, everyone. I hope everybody is having a good morning. For our keynote speaker, we would like to introduce Dr. Amy Agbayani, who is an Emeritus Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Equity, Excellence, and Diversity at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. She is the co-founder of UHM's Operation Mano, the inaugural chair of Hawaii Civil Rights Commission, and member of the Patsy Teaming PAC and Legal Clinic for Immigrant Justice. Let's all welcome Dr. Amy Agbayani.
Good morning, everyone. Shall I start at this time, Markee?
Yes, Dr. Amy, start.
Okay. Today, I will talk, excuse me, about the Filipino experience in Hawaii with a focus on the immigrant experience and civil rights. Although most of you know this history, it is always important to reflect on and appreciate our role in the history and future of the state of Hawaii. I will share some insights drawn from the experiences and challenges faced by Filipinos in Hawaii and our role in the struggle for equality and justice. Although there were Filipinos who jumped ship and joined the Royal Hawaiian Band before 1900, we officially recognized 1906 as the start of Filipino migration to Hawaii, with the arrival of 15 Filipino men who were recruited to work on the plantation. 114 years later, the Filipino community is the second largest ethnic group in the state. Every fourth person in our state has some Filipino ancestry. Hawaii's Filipinos include second, third, and fourth generation families, new immigrants, and people from other parts of the world. About 60% of Hawaii Filipinos are Hawaii born. Each year, 4,000 new Filipinos arrive in Hawaii, and about 40% of the undocumented people in the state are Filipino. Currently, Filipinos as a group in Hawaii have among the lowest income, lowest baccalaureate degrees, underrepresented in the professions, management, and executive jobs. Filipinos on the continent have higher socioeconomic and educational status than the average person in the nation. Filipino migration to Hawaii began with the U.S. colonization of the Philippines and has increased due to a series of U.S. immigration policies that favor the labor needs of the United States. Hawaii is the most ethnically diverse state in our nation, but unfortunately, there continues to be inequality and some groups are not treated fairly, and there is discrimination, and where the talents and aspirations of Filipinos and some other groups have not been and are not valued or supported. I have put these things in a look at our history and our experience in 4 stages. Hopefully it goes from negative to positive, but actually these stages are always present at any time and at any time. The early stage is active discrimination and exclusion. Then the next stage is when we blame the victim and devalue the person. And then the third stage is when we provide assistance and support that group, but require them to adapt and assimilate. And the fourth stage is when we value equality and diversity as compelling self-interest and inclusion as a shared community responsibility. So the first example is from the plantation era, where there was active discrimination and exclusion. Filipinos and other workers were imported to work on the sugar plantations and pineapple fields for the first half of this century. They were, quote, valued for their muscle, not their minds. Although Hawaii plantation economy was dependent on Filipino labor, it was perfectly acceptable to look down on and pay Filipinos and Japanese less than whites. Ethnic wage scales were the rule. Stanley Porteous, a nationally known psychologist in the 1920s and 30s, was recognized for his unscientific and biased research on Hawaiians, Japanese, Filipinos, and Filipinos. He identified a series of, quote, defects of the Filipinos, which, quote, must interfere obviously with good judgment and balance and sane reaction to affairs in general. Some of these defects include, quote, egocentric attitude, obtrusive habits and desire for personal recognition, poor emotional control, and unstable moods. They caution that there is a danger not of undereducating them, but of giving their education the wrong direction. Porteous and his colleagues further warned, it is our opinion that no matter what labels of citizenship we may put on Filipinos, they remain Filipinos, and it will take much more than a knowledge of the three R's to make them American. To make the system of schooling too over-scholastic might be worse than no benefit at all. The surest way to make a malcontent is to educate him either above his intelligence or his opportunities. This was published in 1926. Around that time, Governor Farrington also noted the Filipino children would make good domestic workers and did not need much education. This kind of discredited racist nonsense was also justified used to justify opposition to Philippine independence, decolonization, and self-governance. In addition, Porteous's biased research and social stratification. In addition to this, there are other incidents of problems faced by Filipinos. I'm sorry, I make sure this is on. For example, it is worth noting that 47 men executed between 1827 and 1957, of these, 24 or 51% were Filipinos, 10 were Japanese, and only one was a Haole or Caucasian. So Filipinos actually were executed for various crimes, overrepresented. Over 40 years ago, the University of Hawaii named the Social Science Building at Manoa campus in honor of Stanley Porteous, the Hawaii and international racist scholar. I was part of the group that fought for a name change, and it is now called the Marion and Allen Saunders Building, two Haole teachers who were my mentors. It should be noted that it was Robin Campagnano, a Filipino University of Hawaii regent, successful businessman and lawyer, son of a Filipino immigrant father and a Japanese-American mother, and former Operation Manong student who chaired the committee to rename Porteous Hall. Governor Farrington would have been shocked if he were alive to see Farrington Hall's current principal, a Filipino, and also recognize that the graduates of Farrington High School include Governor Ben Cayetano, retired Supreme Court Justice and current Regent Simeon Acoba, and former Operation Manong student Judge Willie Domingo. Some call the tourist industry the new plantation system. So we had the sugar and pine before. The tourist industry is Hawaii's #1 industry, and Filipino workers, like before, represent the backbone of this segment of the workforce. Last year, Local 5's 12,000 members had a 55-day strike, and their motto was, "One job should be enough." Our workers in the hotel industry really are not valued for the work they do. Right now, Local 5 members have been hit hard by the coronavirus. The majority are unemployed. They have no health insurance and need government and our support. My next example is about language and the public schools. It's an example of where we blame the victim, devalue the child's language, and demand inclusion only by assimilation. So Hawaii has been receiving about 4,000 immigrants from the Philippines since 1965, and by the early 1970s, thousands of non-English speaking, predominantly Ilocano speaking children enrolled in the public schools. The Department of Education issued a report identifying 4 major problems faced by Filipino immigrant children. 1, English language deficiency. difficulty in socializing with local students, lack of relevant schooling in their native country, difficulty in understanding the value system of American society. In response to this report, the Filipino community issued its own report, which I helped draft. In our report, we said that these so-called, quote, problems can be viewed differently and should be rephrased. Instead of saying English language deficiency, we said the problem is lack of appreciation of the language of the immigrant child and lack of teaching staff who understand the child's language. Instead of difficulty in socializing with local students, we said the problem is difficulty of local students socializing with immigrant children. Instead of lack of relevant schooling in their native country, we say the problem is lack of relevant curriculum appropriate to the previous schooling of the immigrant child. Instead of difficulty of understanding the value system of American society, we say the problem is difficulty in understanding the value system of the immigrant student. In this example, the Department of Education is asking the immigrant child to, quote, fit in or, quote, assimilate. The burden for change is entirely on the immigrant, the victim. The host society and the educational institution were not expected to make any changes. Although we want Filipino students to learn English, we also wanted them to appreciate their own language and culture. We wanted orientation and training for the teachers and the local teachers, and we wanted them to hire bilingual teachers. We wanted the DOE to accommodate the new immigrant child and wanted to help the Filipino child be successful in their new home. I'm pleased to note that with the leadership and advocacy of UH Professor Patricia Halagao, who is a member of the College of Education, she was appointed to the Board of Education by my friend, Governor Abercrombie. And she was able to get two policies approved by the Board of Education. One is the multilingual policy, and the other one is a seal of biliteracy. The official position is that the schools not only are there to help teach English, but that the language and culture of the immigrant and Native Hawaiians are valued and maintained. The Board of Education approved a multilingual policy for equitable education and a policy of biliteracy for those who speak two languages. The official policy rationale is that there is a personal, cultural, social, academic, and vocational occupation value in encouraging students to maintain or develop proficiency in English and an additional language. Students who are able to maintain their language and learn English usually perform better, according to various studies. So this is a 180-degree difference in philosophy from the Porteous and DOE statements decades ago. There is abundant evidence that Hawaii and every state needs a multilingual workforce, and workers help our state economy. My third example is also about the workforce. It's an example of an immigrant professional who is being blamed and required to conform. This is about Mr. Manuel Fragante. He applied for a civil service job with the city and county of Honolulu in 1981. He scored the highest out of 721 applicants who took the written civil service examination that year. The administrator who interviewed Mr. Fragante found that his, quote, oral skills were hampered by his accent or manner of speaking, quote, end of quote. As a result, he was rejected for the positions and many other positions similar to that position that he interviewed for. The administrator admitted that we took the case to court, and the administrator admitted that Mr. Fragante's accent was the sole reason why he was not hired. Mr. Fragante, with our community organization, legal corporation, no Naloyo no Nakanaka, lost our case in Hawaii courts. We lost our case in the appeals court, and the U.S. Supreme Court did not hear our case. The court said that employers may base their rejection on an applicant's accent when, quote, it interferes materially with job performance. The distressing message that this case sends to the Filipino immigrant community and all immigrant communities is that they will not be hard if they have an accent different from Hawaii or mainland persons. Although everybody has an accent, only certain accents will be acceptable for hiring in Hawaii. It should be emphasized that Mr. Fragante scored the highest out of 721 applicants in the written test, has a college degree from the Philippines and a long career in the Philippine military, and went and attended a number of mainland educational programs. Later on, Mr. Fragante was hired by the state as a labor as a researcher and statistician, and he's able to communicate both orally and in writing to thousands of clients, and was commended twice for his work and promoted twice. To many Filipinos, immigrants, and his non-Filipino supporters, the failure to hire Mr. Fragante was seen as discrimination based on accent and national origin. This is a good example of requiring the minority or the immigrant to totally adapt to the dominant language and accent. If one cannot adapt, the consequences are serious. The employer and the courts are reaffirming the underlying value of conformity to the dominant language and culture. Although everyone has an accent from New York, Hawaii, or France, Mr. Fragante and other immigrant Filipinos with accents may be doomed to low-paying status position if this community, the wider community, does not make effort to accept various accents. Although Mr. Fragante lost the court case, we were able to successfully lobby for a very strong civil rights law in Hawaii, the strongest in the nation. And we had a new commission. The Hawaii Civil Rights Commission was established by the legislature. It has lots of lawyers in it and lots of other investigators. And I was honored to be the first chair appointed by Governor John Y. Hay and served 8 years. And this Civil Rights Commission looks at discrimination laws not on based on national origin, sexual orientation, disability, and other important protected groups. In 2006, 100 years since the first labor immigrants, Philippine-born state legislator June Abinsay sponsored legislation to establish the Office of Language Access to protect the rights of people with limited English proficiency by requiring state offices to provide language access to state services. Unfortunately, there is not enough enforcement or resources for the Office of Language Access, and I will be going back to the legislature to try and strengthen the responsibilities and provide additional resources and credibility for the Office of Language Access. It's an ongoing issue. So we must, one problem is that our state and our nation does not acknowledge the benefits immigrant neighbors give to the community and to our economy. And the national discourse of President Trump never talks about the benefits of immigrants. He does not seem to remember or care that his own mother was an immigrant for Scotland. His 2 wives are foreign-born. He approves of chain migration for his parents-in-law, or that his multi-million-dollar companies use immigrant workers and professionals. A very important company, the Chu Charitable Trust, states that, quote, documented and undocumented immigrants are crucial to the welfare of our nation and our state. 1 in 5 Hawaii workers are immigrants, making up a critical share of the state's labor force, and 1/3 of the tourist industry are #1 industry. Most are in hotel and food and retail care and social assistance and construction. Immigrant entrepreneurs invigorate the Hawaii economy. 1 in 4 are self-employed business owners. Many hire local workers and generate $400 million of revenue. They have $5 billion spending power, over $1 billion in federal taxes, and $670 million in state and local taxes. The Pew report echoes what many economists have been saying. The U.S. needs immigrants to replace retirees and to support the economy. So that's an example of where we really blame the immigrant oftentimes for issues, problems in the community, and rarely ever see and acknowledge their contributions. My final example is the University of Hawaii. It's a good example of efforts to move from exclusion to inclusion, but it's inadequate. Prior to 1970, Filipinos were generally invisible at the University of Hawaii. There were less than 2% Filipino students at Manoa. The university did not feel any responsibility for this underrepresentation, and they stated in official legislative testimony that the problem was due to Filipino students not meeting university standards and not applying for admissions to UH. In other words, it was the Filipino students' own fault for having low grades and for not applying to UH. Operation Manong evolved from being a tutoring program for immigrant Filipino children to being an Office of Multicultural Student Service to do outreach into the community and the schools to recruit Filipinos, Hawaiians, and other represented students to higher education. With various student service programs like Operation Manong, many more Filipinos and underrepresented groups are able to attend Manoa. But again, oftentimes it's the students who are seen as the problems. The students need to help meet standards. The students have to adapt. Although there has been much, our efforts have fallen short. The public school student population is 23% Filipino, but we are only 14% of the UH system. We're 17% at the community colleges, and at Manoa, there are only 11% undergraduates, 4% graduate students, and 3% tenured and tenorable faculty, and 1% administrators. I used to be part of that 1%. The data shows that once the Filipino student enrolls as an undergraduate or enrolls in anything at the higher education, they persist and actually have higher graduation rates. There are ongoing efforts, and I won't go into them because there may not be enough time, but one excellent example is a program that SEED, my office has at Waipahu and had one in Kalihi called Gear Up. We start with the seventh grade cohort all the way through college, all the way through high school, and help them transition to college. And we actually paid for an Ilocano and a Samoan language faculty to teach in those two schools. I'm glad to say that the Department of Education is now paying them as regular faculty. And there are other programs that I won't go into, and they are very good efforts, but we feel that it's not enough. And so we have a new group. It's 30-year-old group called the Pamantasan Council at UH, and it's open to faculty, staff, and students from each of the 10 campuses. Pamantasan has identified areas that UH is falling short of. One, few transfers from the community college to four-year campuses, few graduate students, few faculty and administrators, and not enough Philippine-related courses. For example, most campuses do not have even one full-time Philippine language faculty, even though 20% of the campus is Filipino. We need those of you on this conference to demand more opportunities to learn about Philippine language, culture, and the history of Filipinos. As a community, we need to do more to get Filipino students and faculty engaged, to expand the Philippine content in the curriculum, do more research, and encourage students and faculty to engage in community service. And I have two examples on how you can get engaged in a good community service with Local 5 and the Legal Clinic. We face challenging times. There are so many critical issues, and there are only 24 hours a day. We need to support Native Hawaiian aspirations, boldly address climate change, poverty, discrimination against LGBTQ women, persons with disabilities, and all forms of inequality. However, we have to focus sometimes. And since my retirement from UH, I have kept involved with the UH Pamantasan Council, actively worked for the Democrats. As some of you may have seen, I was the Hawaii spokesperson for the Democratic nomination of Joe Biden, and I've helped with various local political campaigns, including co-chair for Radiant Cordero, who will replace City Council member Joey Manahan, an immigrant and former OM student. But my increased attention is asking you to support a new organization, the Legal Clinic for Immigrant Justice, called TLC. This was started by a handful of community leaders, lawyers, church members, and none of them were immigrants. I joined later. TLC was started a month after President Trump became president in 2017 as a reaction to President Trump's Muslim ban and his hateful agenda attacking immigrants and refugees. TLC's mission is to make hope, quote, make hope, dignity, and justice available to vulnerable immigrants in Hawaii through quality immigrant legal services, education, and advocacy. We are part of a network of legal clinics. Our sister organizations are on the front line at the border, seeking to protect asylum seekers, fighting to keep children with their parents, and opposing Trump inhumane immigration policies. TLC will focus on serving people seeking asylum, family reunification, and we support the Dreamers and DACA, many of whom are Filipinos. Immigrants without legal representation frequently lose their rights and are deported. TLC partnered with Local 5 churches and other organizations to hold citizen workshops with volunteer attorneys and bilingual volunteers. Some of them were UH and other students. Only last week, TLC was able to get a federal CARES fund from the city and county of Honolulu to focus on Filipino COVID-19. TLC has partnered with the Filipino Community Center and various UH Manoa programs like SEED, School of Medicine, Public Health, and the language programs. Many of these also helped during the Filipino census count. This project, the COVID project, will have a strong social media, radio, and outreach effort to provide messages in Ilocano and Filipino about COVID and free testing. Our first event is a radiothon next Saturday, November 28th, between 10 to 12. We want to share information about COVID, schedule free testing in locations like Kalihi and Waipahu, and we will have entertainment during those 2 hours, including our talented Anna Davide. People of color and immigrants have disproportionate number of COVID positive cases and deaths in the nation. This includes immigrants and Filipinos in Hawaii and the mainland. For example, Filipino nurses in San Francisco died in alarming numbers. Over a third of foreign-born nurses are Filipino, and over the past 50 years, many nurses have come, and right now there are over 150,000 nurses nationally. They are in the front lines helping with the COVID problem, and also they are dying from it. In Hawaii, the 2 most impacted groups for COVID are Filipino and the Pacific Islanders, both heavily immigrant communities with English language proficiency, limited English language proficiency. They live in multi-generational households. Many work on the front lines and in the tourism industry. 20% of Hawaii Filipinos have tested positive, and it's now the second highest. Pacific Islanders are the highest. They are 28% of positive cases, yet they only represent 4% of the state's population. My current focus these days are on the issue of language access to government services for immigrant communities and civil rights for all. For an immediate task, as I mentioned, please join TLC and Philcom and our COVID project next Saturday, 10 to 12 Radiothon. Help us get the message out to your family and friends. Be a volunteer. I will ask Anna Davide to share the details with you. For long-term advocacy, let me end by asking you to continue being proud of your Filipino heritage, learning about Filipinos in Hawaii and actively participating in the community. We must work to improve the Filipino socioeconomic education status in our multicultural state. Our work for Filipinos helps not only Filipinos, but the entire state. Now's the time to continue to support Native Hawaiians, Filipinos, and other ethnic groups, and the civil rights for all. Filipino experience has informed and played an integral part of Hawaii's struggle for equality and community. It is time to stand up, stand together, share our talents, shine a light on Filipinos and vulnerable communities. We have a legacy of advocacy, and moving forward, we need your talent and vision to support and enjoy diversity, equality, and inclusion. Maraming salamat.
Thank you for that, Doc Amy. That was a really, really good talk and presentation. So for anyone now who has questions, you can go ahead and type it in our chat box. Or if you want to ask Doc Amy yourself, just let us know and click above in the top right part of the screen. There should be a button there that says share audio and video. And then go ahead and click on that one. We should be able to let you in and ask your questions directly to Doc Amy. Otherwise, go ahead and type your questions in the chat box. Again, thank you very much for that, Doc Amy. It was really, really good. Well, to begin with, I guess we don't have any questions yet, but I have a question from your presentation myself. Earlier, you mentioned about the rarity of Philippine language and culture courses at the university, despite having a huge Filipino student population. So earlier this semester, I'm not sure if you heard, but there were efforts by the Board of Regents of the university in abolishing the Philippine Language and Culture program. I just want to hear your thoughts about this.
Well, clearly they're wrong and should not do that. And I think they've actually backpedaled, but we have to continue to be vigilant and active. And it's not a done deal, and I don't think it will be. This is not new. Operation Manong, ethnic studies, and Philippine studies and women's studies were always on the cutting block every time there was a budget cut. One of the reasons I got very active in local politics was when Operation was new. There was a budget cut of 1% for the entire campus. They cut Operation Manong 100%. And so I said, excuse me, don't do this. So I just called up my friend, who was then a very junior legislator, Neil Abercrombie. He just yelled at the dean. And we also went to the media and so forth. And so eventually, ethnic studies, women's studies, and Operation Manong got additional positions because we just didn't take that. And so but you need students who want the courses. We have tried to offer, and we will continue to offer courses with lecturers and the others. But if you only have 3 students, they just wipe it out, and say, we're not being discriminatory. We'll wipe out 3 students in French and so forth. So we got to get people to want these. We got to get the students to say they need these classes and they will attend. And Pamantasan is doing a number of interesting things. This year, they have for the first time, and I think she's on the maybe participating, Debbie Arellano from Maui Community College is teaching Ilocano, and every campus can enroll in the Maui Community College class. And I think she has over 20 students this semester. And we're also working on by the way, so many of our Filipino students are in the community college, and so we've got to make sure that the transfer flow works. And so now we've got the Pamantasan Council has a academic proposal based on Professor Raymond Leongson's certificate in Philippine Studies at Leeward, but it's going to be a little broader, and it will include a little more Filipinos in Hawaii. And so we're trying to have it community college students transfer with an AA, get the certificate, and then we're also trying to have a pipeline through ethnic studies and the College of Education for graduate degrees. So we need your help to make this happen. By the way, we have 2 Filipino UH regents, and we have a number of Filipinos in the legislature, some of whom are immigrant, and they will. I will be making sure that they talk to the chairs of higher education to make sure that it's fair. And and because these people, these legislators often come to me and to your group saying, "Oh, can you help us get elected?" And I said, "Well, you didn't help me get my you didn't think translation and language is important before, but you want us to translate your candidate flyer? You want us to get our Filipinos to call up Filipinos to vote for you? Works both ways." So I think some of the more intelligent politicians, nearly every intelligent politician understands that they have to listen to the community. And the Filipino community is the second largest community in the state, but not enough of us are voters, and not enough of us run for office. So I encourage everyone on this conference call, if you're interested in local politics, I'm interested in you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Amy. That was a very interesting way of like putting everything together. But yes, our biggest reason, I mean, I think our biggest thing that we pointed out to the region, I mean, the heads of the Philippine language and culture program, is that we have about 500 students signed up for all these Filipino classes. And usually there are waiting lists for each class. So it does not make sense for them to just remove the program totally. And we have a lot of majors, both for Ilocano and Filipino, to justify the continuity of the program. So hopefully it continues on forever. But like you said, it's not going to be the end of the battle. We'd have to keep fighting for the continuity of the program, and hopefully
But you have to have dedicated attention to this. And oftentimes even our own faculty are out to lunch or overextended, and they're not advocating. So you got to have pay attention when, like, I just saw the reorganization yesterday on the website, and I'm trying to read it. It's 300 pages long, but I'm just honing in what's happening to Philippine language positions, what's happening to Philippine studies. For example, Filipinist studies and Chinese studies and all the other area studies have been downgraded. They're no longer centers reporting to a special international dean. They're now going to be part of a larger college, just like a department. So you add Philippine studies and all these other centers, and they become a little department. So we're backsliding, and it's really hard because we only have 3% Filipino faculty at Manoa, and the community colleges have 6%. And there are many of you on this conference, on this web call, that go to other campuses, and we would like to see, and there are good faculty at Chaminade and HPU who could be interested in support and having more languages. But there's no excuse for the state-funded and largest university of the state not to have this when 20%, when our community represents 23% of the public schools and about 25% of the state. That is a lot of citizens, and that is a lot of people, but we do not speak up.
Yes, Dr. Amy. I guess we just need to make sure that we really speak up for these things. But anyway, we have a couple questions that just came in. One question from Araceli Quisano. Question for Dr. Agbayani. I live in a small city in Washington State, and we just created the Racial Equity Committee. I'm part of this new committee. I want to highlight the challenges of our Asian community that includes Filipinos and immigrants. However, because there are so many things to focus regarding equity, it's almost overwhelming. The question is, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting advocacy work, and tips on how to engage a community to discuss what their concerns are, who in my little town is not apparent that they exist? I'm gonna go ahead and pin this question so everybody else can see it as well.
Okay, it is difficult for Filipinos and the group we belong to nationally called Asian American Pacific Islanders. Altogether, Filipinos, Indians, Chinese, Japanese, Burmese, Pakistanis, the whole group, we're only 6% of the nation altogether. And Filipinos are second to Asian Indians in terms of numbers, but it's only 6%. The African American community is over 12%, and the Hispanic community is about 16%. So one of the things you do is you have to find one friend, just one friend, and wherever you are. If you're on campus, there must be the equivalent of ASUH, or there must be an equivalent language community there. Or here in Hawaii, we actually go to the unions. The unions, Local 5, is one of our strongest advocates. Without a doubt, they influence nearly every election in the particular district they want to influence. For example, Joey Manahan, my Filipino friend, former student, and Radiant Cordero, his chief of staff, and for example, ran in Kalihi, and they won big time. And so it goes. So I would recommend going to look at where are the Filipinos working, and in the public and in public schools. There are parent groups, not just Filipino, asking for better bilingual education, better education. So, but don't try and take the whole ball of wax. It's too hard. Just pick one or two very important issues to yourself and look for one or two friends. And also you can connect now through the internet with a lot of things. For example, for the last campaign, there was Philams for Biden. The Filipinos in every state, like Hawaii, they were calling Nevada Filipinos. Now the Filipinos are calling Filipinos in Georgia. So it's a national issue, and you can get a lot of support through good groups. We have a lot of advocacy groups at the national level, like NAFA, National Association of American Federation of Filipino Associations. So there are groups.
Thank you for that answer, Doc Amy. I hope that answers your question, Araceli. That's kind of how Balik Tanaw started as well. It started with Chachi wanting to do something, and then she approached me, and then I told her that we need more people. So it started with an advocacy, and then we just had to get more people to get it really done and get it going. It looks like we have another question here. I'm going to go ahead and pin it right now. It's from Stanley Mamuad. He says, thank you, Doc Amy. Earlier you mentioned about underrepresented Filipino students. How about student Filipinos who are victims of systemic racism and systemic prejudice here at UH, where the professor and advisor themselves are prejudiced against certain Filipino students and forcing them to quit their program of passion?
Well, that sounds horrible, and I agree it must exist, and something, and and we should try and figure out how to help that, help stop that. My initial advice would be um, to if I haven't told them this, but check with some of our Filipino faculty, or programs like Christine Quimel at the seed office replaced me in my office, and she knows, and Agnes Malate, for example, they know the process of complaining as a student. If this is a civil, this can go to civil rights. Uh, Within the university, they have a process of appealing, of talking, of complaining about discrimination and civil rights. So uh, so that's the formal complaint process. But an informal complaint is you might actually end up, you and the others talk to, uh, with, after you figured it out, how to present your issues and show evidence. um, then you could go to the chair, you can, and that person will, and or else even higher than the chair, the dean, and say, and there is, as I said, committees uh, um, on discrimination, and I will try and put it down as to how the the official name of some of those offices. But I would recommend you email the Pamantasan Council. That's a whole bunch of faculty at Manoa who may be able to help you. And Christine is chairing that, and the other co-chair is Leon Florendo, a faculty member from West Oahu, who was also Operation Manong, and he is Samoan and Filipino, and he knows how the system works.
All right, thank you for that, Doc Amy. Attorney Nadine Ortega also mentions here, Stanley Mamuad, you can contact the Office of Title IX at UH Manoa, also for these issues. For anyone who also have questions, go ahead and just keep typing them on the chat box, or if you guys have questions that you want to ask Doc Amy yourself, just let us know in the chat box, and click on the upper right hand of the video screen right now that says share audio and video, so that we can allow you to get on and ask Doc Amy yourself. All right, I guess while waiting for some questions, we have some prepared questions for you, Doc Amy. So in the time before Facebook, how did you get your information about what was happening in the Philippines, and how did you get people organized? So like at the time of before all this social media happening now, how did you do that
Okay.
whole thing?
Well, I'll give you an example, and it so happens it's about uh, martial law in the Philippines and how we organized at that time when there was no internet or anything. And our one of our leaders and died about 10 days, 2 weeks ago, Dean Aligado, professor of ethnic studies. But he, along with Lindy Aquino, myself, Mike and Sheila Foreman, Ben and Melinda Kirkfleet, we were sort of the core group at Manoa doing anti-Marcos stuff. And I was with Operation Manong at the time. And we had a newsletter, for example, called Pahayag. And we were able to just mimeograph it and send it out at most every 2 weeks, which isn't very much nowadays. Now you could get every 10 minutes or something, or live comments. But we only were able to do that. And, you know, uh, now that it's 50 years later, I can tell you, we used to do it at the University of Hawaii Operation Manong office, which is probably not a good idea to do politics, but we did. We thought it was part of our responsibility to educate the public as to a home country issue. And then my fiscal officer, for example, would say, why do you need this electric stapler? I said, oh, I have lots of programs. You know, we were stapling Hayag. And another example was one time Lindy Aquino, who knows a lot about the Marcos family and dictatorship. She's written a couple of books on it, and she's the first head of the Philippine Studies Center and professor of political science. She and others helped edit Pahayag, and we were at a meeting, and someone said, "Oh, I'd like to meet the editor of Pahayag," and I said, "Oh, she's on the mainland," and Lindy Aquino said, "Oh, he's on the mainland." You know, I go, "Oh," because we didn't have a real name as the editor. And when we would demonstrate outside of the consulate, it was great because, you know, it's very near the freeway, and we demonstrated at Kalaniani Old Highway. One time I was demonstrating against Marcos because they rented a house there, and there's only about 2 feet to the fence and Kalaniani Oli Highway, and they were watering us with water from inside, and so we'd go near the street, and the police would make us go further near the fence. So we had a lot of important people coming in and out of Hawaii, and we helped. We were connected to the Philippine groups, and in Hawaii we also got help from the unions, so a lot of it was word of mouth, telephones, and a newsletter, a paper newsletter.
For that, Doc Amy. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of work now, compared to like what people do now. They just click it on their phones and like share it to everybody. But before, it's really all the legwork and the time that you have to spend. I'm not sure if there are any more questions right here. Looks like it. We have one question that just came in. It's from Patrick Kua. Let me go ahead and pin this on the chat so everybody can see it. He says, Doc Amy, as an alumni of FHS Farrington, there are some on here too. I was wondering if you can, if available, send information or resources in regards to Wallace's attitude towards Filipinos during that time.
Okay, I will. By the way, there's a fantastic Filipino faculty member at Farrington. He's sort of the advisor to the Filipino student group there, and he does wonderful things. Like last year, he had a nice speakers forum, and it was on women Filipino leaders, and it was organized by the Filipino students themselves. So I will try and send resources regarding Farrington's attitude towards Filipinos. Okay.
All right, thanks for that, Doc Amy. Also,
I'd like to comment on the act globally, think locally. It's a phrase that I have used tons of times because I think it really is important, and it really makes the connection so well that what we do here is very, very important, and it's the only thing we can really do is here where you are, but you must think in the context of larger issues, and that we are always interconnected. My other favorite phrase is everything is political except for politics, which is personal.
Last thing, Doc Amy. So we have just about 5 more minutes for any other questions. Otherwise, we will be starting to wrap up soon. So go ahead and send in your questions. But while waiting, just a quick question for you, Doc Amy. I saw you had an interview. I saw it on YouTube. I forgot when it was. but it was quite a bit. You mentioned there that you went to school at the University of the Philippines back home, and then you moved here to Hawaii for your graduate program. What do you see as the change? What do you see as the change in the Filipino community over time since you came here for your graduate studies?
Thank you. I guess like the Filipino plantation workers who were recruited to come to Hawaii, they had no intention of staying in Hawaii. They were supposed to stay for 5 years, save up every dollar, but and then go back to the Philippines. Of course, they never had enough money to go back to the Philippines, and so many of them were unable to have a family for decades. But for myself, I did not. I was an international foreign student at the East West Center and was here for my master's degree. And I did it on about the Philippine legislature. But my PhD was supposed to be on Filipino student movement because that was the most important thing going on in the Philippines. But the East West Center would not fund me because they were worried that I would be put in jail, which was probably true. If I went to the Philippines for my field study, I would have probably gotten into trouble. So I worked very, very hard on the research on student protest behavior everywhere. And so I said, well, what's the most important student protest in America today? And it was the Black student college kids doing sit-ins and everything in the South for the civil rights movement with Malcolm, with and so what I did was I did my dissertation was on the Black student protest movement and the civil rights. I'd never met a Black person, and I had never been to the South, but I did a statistical analysis, and nobody read my dissertation, I don't think, but I got a PhD at the ripe old age of 26.
Well, congratulations on that achievement, Doc Amy. We all try to aim for that and get also a PhD at that age, but I'm way past that age now since I moved here to the U.S. At around, I think I was 22 when we moved here to the U.S. And none of my education from back in the Philippines actually transferred over, so I had to start back from zero. I will actually be talking more about that in session 5 tomorrow, of my struggles and then what I had to do to like overcome that coming here to the U.S. But looks like we just have one last question and then we should be over. It's from Libby Dumanhug. Hi, Doc Amy. What are the state? What can the state of Hawaii do more to support the Filipino student population at the community colleges? I'm going to go ahead and pin this again for everyone.
Well, I think the community colleges are actually doing a very, very good job. We are either number one or number two student population in nearly every campus. But the transfer rate is lousy. We should be transferring, double the numbers that are coming to the four-year campuses. And so that is one of the Pamantasan efforts, and we're working hard to do that. The biggest problem for Filipinos is tuition and the cost of living. And so we really would, I think the tuition, we have to make sure it doesn't get any higher, particularly at the four-year campuses and in graduate school. But unfortunately, so many Hawaii people, not just Filipino, Hawaii students are working more than 20 hours a week. You know, a long time ago when I was going to school, we didn't have to work because we had a scholarship. And so we have to encourage more scholarships. Oh, for one of the things that people don't know, but I helped establish the B plus scholarships when I was helping my friend at the legislature who was chair of higher education. I said, let's pretend it's similar to A plus that Governor Cayetano did for preschool. kindergarten. What we did was say anyone with a B or higher, low income, gets a little money. And so that is happening actually without even many of the applicants knowing that they're adding money because of the B plus program that I helped establish. And so we need more money. We also need to educate your parents and yourselves as to what priorities there are. Sometimes it is true that there's so much demand for our Filipino students to work many hours to contribute to the family rent or whatever, or send home to the Philippines. But it's really also not the best solution, and have to work on other solutions, because like many Filipinos will work 18 hours instead of, 16 hours instead of 8 hours, 2 jobs, instead of saying, let's fight for better wages and keep it at one job, So, so I think the best I could say is that you should have a little group, whatever group it is, if it's the Tipuyo group or the or any other group. You should look at these issues of tuition and make sure, like, for example, if there is another tuition increase, you guys have to say no, and on my own personal part, I have gotten myself and other retired Filipino faculty, we are establishing Filipino scholarships at UH. So there are a couple of new ones already, including mine. You could look it up, Amy Agbayani scholarship
We
on
should all look
civil
that up then,
rights.
Doc Amy. Thank you for that information.
But it's
Oh,
only
okay.
from Hanoi right now.
Anyway, thank you very much again, Doc Amy, for gracing our event today. And thank you to our participants for all your questions. Unfortunately, we can't go through the next few questions because we will be starting with session 2 in just a few minutes. But then again, thank you very much for all your questions and for coming in for session 1. To go into session 2, just you can click on leave on the upper right part of your screen, and then go back on the left-hand side of Hop In. You should see sessions. Click on that one and go into session 2. You should be in there. And then if you have any questions, please let us know. Again, Doc Amy, thank you very much for joining us and helping us make this happen, and for being our keynote. It was a very interesting talk. And again, if you want to join us in our further sessions for session 2, 3, whatnot, you're more than welcome to join us. But we won't keep you. We know that you're always busy, so we won't keep you. But again, thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.